Hello, I'm Huples Cat. How much does it cost you to start prepping if you've never prepped? What's the minimal amount of preps you need to bug in? Whether it's a local, regional, national or international disaster, it might last a couple of days, or it might last a couple of weeks, or a few months, or even years.
The Premier has declared an energy emergency across the province.
In the downtown core, there is no power.
September 11th, that's what's going through my mind right now.
Maybe this is Al-Qaeda's latest attack.
The officials aren't even sure at this point how extensive this power outage is. What I can tell you is we have reports of blackouts covering basically all of Ontario.
And you've done nothing at all to prepare for this. How much would it cost if you started today? Now for the pricing, I'm mainly using Amazon.ca and I'm using Canadian prices. But I will be putting in text the American, the British, and possibly European, and maybe even the Russian costs of what I'm talking about. Now before you buy anything, surviving any disaster, whatever the disaster is, really depends on actions before, during and after, and also mostly on luck. You can't buy luck, but you can buy things that might increase your chance of survival. The girl in this excellent Russian film realizes that the way down out of the collapsing building is blocked. She goes back up to a couple of flights and then she exits the building. She doesn't lower herself over the balcony. She sees the van, she jumps on the van. Speed and actually less chance of injury. But she needed luck and she will need help. I spend much time online searching for prepping and emergency preparedness to realise that most preppers don't know what they're talking about, and even those that do know what they're talking about spend most of their time talking about surviving the first 24 hours of an event and their stocks, so they don't have to talk too much about what they're actually going to do 3 years after a massive disaster. Now a few focus on homesteading and being self-sufficient, and they're the challenge you want to aim for. But for this video, you have done zero to get ready for any emergency at all. What are you going to do?
We had no emergency backup systems go on. Employees used their cell phones to guide people down the stairs.
There is no subway, there are no buses, there are no streetcars, nothing for now. We're all stuck together.
I'm not able to contact my husband on the cell phone. I don't know about my kids. You know, it's all, I don't understand.
Well, if you live in Canada, you can buy what I'm going to suggest. Then you will be ready for anything. Well, you won't, but you'll be much better prepared than most people. Now, Canada, federally and provincially, wants you to have a 72-hour kit. They spend a lot of money and a lot of time and effort telling you to have a 72-hour kit. Outside of the major earthquake zone of Western Canada, and some people who live rural and some people on the East Coast who have snowstorms, most people in Canada don't have 72-hour kits, and that's a bit of a shame. It's much more of a shame when you consider, when you actually look at the detailed information provincially and federally in Canada, what the government actually recommends is 1 to 2 weeks food and water and medicines, because they're not going to be able to help you if the disaster is big enough for at least 2 weeks. But that's an altogether other issue. Now in terms of 72-hour kits or 48-hour kits or 144-hour kits, I recommend you look at what's commercially available in detail, look at the contents list, have a look at the photographs, and then go out there and buy the products individually. You're probably going to buy stuff that's more appropriate to what you need where you are than what the bags manufacturers shoved in. You're also much more likely to get very high quality gear compared to what's been put in the bag. So a commercial basic kit's going to cost you 40 to 60 Canadian dollars per person for about 72 hours. I would not recommend you get one, and I definitely would try not to rely on one. But if you have nothing else, get one. Including a radio, gloves and a knife is actually nice in this kit. The rest to my trained eye is likely junk. They have a squeeze flashlight. I had these when I was a kid. You used to be able to send off a couple of shillings in England and buy them. It took me a long time, but I finally got one. As an historical object, it's fascinating. And it does kind of work. Ready? Oh. It's better than nothing. It's almost nothing. You can spend $40 and get one of these. It's solar operated. It lasts for years and years, and it's kind of fun. And there's lots of things you can do with it. This is also a solar flashlight. This also has a hand crank. Now cheap hand cranks are going to break very quickly. Try not to rely on them. But doing this a few times is definitely going to be much superior for light length than using a squeeze one. Also try and get one that has extra brightness and also one that can signal you're in trouble. Now you don't need 5,000 or 10,000 lumen flashlights. You don't need to spend $500 on a flashlight. You need to spend about $25 to $35 on a good solar flashlight. If you're lucky and if you survive, you might be thinking, oh, I might need a first aid kit. you'd be right. You have to survive, of course. After 34 years working mainly as a trauma ICU nurse, I can tell you the price of the first aid kit is irrelevant. This is one item you're not going to go as cheap as possible. Cheaper with first aid kits is not a good idea. I recommend Adventure Medical Kits. I find them pretty good. I also go to this place and get some supplies once in a while. Burns kit are a good idea. This is a commercial one I got from Costco years ago, and I've obviously added a lot to it, and I need to actually get a better bag because I've stuffed it so full it's no longer operable. You might want to consider some splints. There's lots of things you can spend on first aid. But if you're on a budget, a cheap kit's going to cost you about 23 Canadian dollars. You should have one in your home, you should have one in your car, and you should have one with you when you go adventuring. I have other kits. I really like first aid kits. So you can pay less for a first aid kit, but you're going to get less quality stuff. If you pay less for one, consider the fact that you're then going to have to spend money buying decent things. I hate to break it to you, but even in a normal winter when there's a bad power outage, you're going to have to boil and cook and clean using ice cold water that's somehow mysteriously melted in your house if it's in the depth of winter. Because your gas and your electricity and even your water often won't work in a disaster. There are multiple cheap options available for stoves. Propane is not okay.
This is all wrong.
Propane self-limits, it runs out. For the purposes of my prepping, I'm buying stuff that's not single use as far as I can, and I want stuff I can use a year to 2 years after the emergency started, because it might be a long duration event.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you!
However, flat-packed rocket stoves are totally worthless, especially the titanium ones. Do not buy them, do not be fooled. Do not ever buy a flat-packed rocket stove. Be aware that a wood stove is the way to go, but many of them I'm showing here, I'm sure if you buy them, are actually tiny. You've got to be very careful buying stuff online that's cheap, because honestly, a lot of the times they're too small to use. If you buy a BioLite rocket stove and a kettle pot for it, it's going to boil you 2 litres of water in about 20 minutes, using very minimal amounts of wood. It also produces a tiny amount of electricity. I have two of them, I've used them for years. This is my original one. It's over a decade, well, I think it's about a decade old now. Put a big lighter in with all pieces of kit. It's a good idea. This is the kettle pot, and this is the BioLite stove. Comes out, goes in, put tinder in, put some small wood in, put some bigger wood in, put some ignition stuff in there, boom. And this turns on. The batteries are always full in my kit. Once or twice a year I recharge them. And it has a fan. Makes a really efficient burning. If this fails, this still works. This also works as a battery. Whatever kit you get, use it, because you don't want to have to learn how to use it in an emergency. The price differential between a decent stove and a bad stove is so small, get one of these. It works, it lasts, and it uses minimal amounts of wood. That's an important thing if it's a long-term event. Okay, you survived and now you're thirsty. Hydration's important. Sure, you can drink from the toilet and the heating tank in your house, but that water's going to run out. And in terms of the heating tank, it's not altogether certain it's clean. Most public and a lot of private toilets within a few days of there being no mains water are actually not going to be very fit to drink out of the cistern from. Of course you can store water, and you should store some water, but it's going to run out and the containers are bulky and also crucially expensive. You can harvest rainwater, and that's a great idea as long as you don't live in a desert and as long as the rains come and as long as it's not a radioactive event or a volcanic event. But you should be able to harvest rain anyway. You just really need a tarp with a hole in it and some rope. It's quite easy to do. On the subject of pooping, you need to buy yourself a 5-gallon drum and a hunter's toilet seat. Store up old plastic bags that you're going to recycle inside the 5-gallon bucket. Don't worry too much about toilet paper, you should have some in the house. Once that runs out, you're going to use linen cloths and wash them. But this is beyond this video. Now a Brita filter might work, it might work okay, I don't know, I wouldn't risk it. But I would use a gravity water filter. I have 2 of these for hiking and camping. This one is my backup emergency one. Whatever you get, it's critical that it says this. It's got to be bacteria, viruses and protozoa. A lot of the gravity filters, including the gravity version of this, it's called gravity, don't really filter protozoa. Nice kit, reliable, will actually run out eventually. But the one I've been using for hiking and camping is still trucking after a decade. Given how important water is, you should actually get yourself a system that's going to last 10 years and it's going to work well and reliably. I did that quite a few years ago. In fact, I think about 24 years ago, I bought a Berkey filter. There's been some negatives on Berkeys, ignore it. Essentially, they work. Very little maintenance, easy to use, good clean water. If you're currently buying plastic bottled water and you've got a main supply of water and it's not petroleum infected, you might actually want to buy one of these and stop buying plastic bottles. Within a year or two it will pay for itself. And like I say, the filters in this last for 10 years. And if you add the white filters underneath it, it's actually good for stuff like mercury and arsenic. If you live in a cold part of the world, a tent inside your house will actually help keep you warm at night when you're trying to sleep. And a nice snazzy green one actually only costs 92 Canadian. Please note, this is about bugging in. I absolutely would never use this nor recommend this type of a tent if you're going to spend any time outdoors, whether it be a bug out or an overnight camping expedition to your garden. Now, if you have a real winter, you're going to need a 4-season tent, and 4-season tents aren't the be-all and end-all winter camping, as I've been finding out. Every winter I go camping, and every winter I have major problems, almost at the point of being able to do it now. So now you need a sleeping bag. They're much easier to use in the home in a disaster than trying to make do with duvet and blankets, though of course you can do that if you run a strict budget. In my example, I could get one for $70 Canadian, but bear in mind the low temperature is only really achievable if you're fully dressed and overdressed, and you're still going to be very cold. The rating of sleeping bags means, generally speaking, if it says minus 10 centigrade, round about minus 0 centigrade, you're going to feel very cold in it. Depending on where you live, depending on what your winters are like, will depend on the type of sleeping bag you get. I do recommend synthetic because you can dry them if they get wet, and this is a disaster after all. This is my winter sleeping bag. It costs an enormous amount of money, but it works. My weather, my conditions does not dictate what you buy. Your weather, your conditions dictates what you buy. Now you do need sleeping pads for everybody. This isn't about comfort, though comfort's important. You can easily use pillows or blankets or even mattresses put on the floor to actually make you more comfortable. What the point of the sleeping pad is its R rating. The R rating means how little heat from your body will soak into the ground when you're lying on the pad. In warm places, warm times of the year, not a factor. Get a cheap sleeping pad, you'll be fine. This one's cheap, but it has an R rating of 2.2. I'm not going to go into R ratings. I'd reject this. The R rating is too low. Now the $56 Canadian one here doesn't even bother to tell you what the R rating is. It might be brilliant. I highly doubt it. But the $80 one is actually got an R rating of 4.5. That's not bad. I've been using a 5.5 in the winter and it's just about okay. But my winters are pretty brutal. And if I'm indoors, I think 4.5 would be absolutely fine. Again, you need to figure out where you're going to use this and what your weather's going to be like. If you live in Florida, you probably don't need to worry about R rating. You probably need to go for comfort and you probably need to go for the cheapest one you can get. Now, if your plan is never to leave your home if there's been a disaster, I would strongly advise you to look at clothing next. Now hold on, I know you guys and gals are all hungry, but this has been a disaster and we've had to look to survive and you're not actually going to be eating right now. Suck it up. Exposure, cold, will kill you far quicker than starvation. Boots! They need to be waterproof. They need to be insulated, though you're going to use thick winter socks, I hope. You're going to need footwear like this inside the home. There may be flooding inside the home, there may be damage inside the home. This is not the time to be wearing flip-flops. Even if you're staying in the house, you're going to need gloves. The house might be damaged and you want to keep your hands warm if it's cold. You're not going to be able to recreate modern society until utilities are restored. You want flimsy little ones that you can use as work gloves, and you want a decent pair of ski gloves. And if you're smart, this hand will fit inside this glove. Around here at times I need 3 layers on my hands. Now coats are tricky. They vary in price hugely. If you're on a strict budget, you want to get 1 or 2 thin coats that are actually cheaper, and you want to get the second one slightly bigger than the first one so they both fit on you at the same time. You might look funny, but it's way better than dying of exposure. Now, of course, you can do something like I did, and you can get yourself an $1,800 coat. I actually need this for about 2 to 3 weeks of the year. It's very good. I like it. It was within my budget. But you can layer up decently in the winter for not too much money. Okay, let's eat. On average in Canada in May 2023, the average family of 4 spent $1,357 per month on groceries. Food is increasing in price due to many factors, none of which I'm going to get into today. So you can buy specific emergency foods. They're very expensive and generally they tend to be poor nutritional value. What you need to do starting this week is devote some of that $1,357 you spend a month to buying 1 or 2 things extra every time you go to the grocery store and putting them in a box underneath your bed. Shop wisely at the grocery store. Mylar packet rice and pasta used to be available and sometimes was available for 99 cents and sometimes $1.99. Recently the price seems to have risen to $7 to $10 to even $12 a packet. Now a lot of packet foods require water, especially emergency ones, and that might be something you don't have the time or the ability to provide quickly and easily in a disaster. So get good old-fashioned tins, but don't forget the tin opener. The food is a rising cost, but you want to get at least 2 weeks supply of food in, and you can store it under your bed or in the pantry. So get the supply of food that you actually would enjoy and food you will actually eat. The variety is the spice of life in a disaster and in the here and now. If you're really on a budget, get some lentils, get some oatmeal. So what's the cost of basically prepping in Canada in November of 2023? What does it cost per adult? And I'm talking about male adults here because women's clothing and sleeping bags tend to be a little bit cheaper. The basic first aid kit will cost you $20. The basic emergency kit will cost you $60 per person. Advise you get that, not anything else that's cheaper. And avoid propane. It's only good for very short duration events. The backup toilet is going to cost you $14 for the 5-gallon bucket and about $32 for the seat. $46 to have a poop. A basic water filter is going to cost you $58. I actually recommend you get a Berkey, and the cheapest Berkey that would work for you is 474 Canadian dollars. Now again, if you're buying bottled water right now in your municipal water supply and it hasn't got petrochemicals in it, you need to get the Berkey anyway. It's much cheaper. The Snazzy Green tent for indoors is $92, but if you fancy orange, it's $97. A basic sleeping bag that's going to be okay down to around about freezing is going to be about $70. You're staying in your home, no matter what happens, you should aim to keep the temperature of the home never falling below 0 because you can have all sorts of problems when the pipes burst. A decent R-rated sleeping pad, $80. Decent rubber boots that are insulated, $63. Decent ski gloves, $45. 2 puffy coats are going to cost you $33 each or $66 for 2. So basic prepping is going to cost $810 per male. Now obviously you don't need more than 1 Berkey filter per person, and you don't need to have more than 1 rocket stove per person. So the actual price, if it's more than 1 person buying this, is actually a little bit less. $810 Canadian is $590 American, or £472, or 539 euros. It's a staggering 52,000 rubles if you're in Russia. However, Russians generally just prep by buying vodka, and that supplies all of their nutritional, hydration and warmth needs in disasters. Now you can add to this list, and you should. You want to have really good, decent socks. You want to have decent underwear, a decent knife. You don't need to spend $400 on a knife or even $200 on a knife. But you want one knife that's full tang that's around about $60 to $80. You of course need Bic lighters and a lot of them. You can get ferro rods, you can get all of those tricksy things. Bics work really well, providing they don't come in contact with salt waters. I do recommend mosquito nets, as many of them as you can get. I do recommend paracord and basic rope, and I also recommend you get quite a bit of duct tape and also maybe some plastic sheeting and quite a few tarps. You might want to get wool blankets, but again, they cost a lot of money, and if they get wet, they're not very good. This is a blended one, so it actually dries out pretty quick. Now, $810 sounds like a lot of money, and it kind of is. But if you buy a little bit now, and you buy a little bit next week, and you buy a little bit the week after, you too can easily get yourself minimally prepped for a budget and ready to face whatever disaster comes your way. One thing for sure, disaster will happen at some point in your lifetime.
So it is now coming up to about 6 o'clock Eastern Time. It's been just over 90 minutes since the power went out in New York City, Toronto, Ottawa, various cities up and down the eastern seaboard.
This is rush hour situation in Toronto right now. Traffic lights are down. There's absolute gridlock.
This is chaos, and I want to tell you that we need some more people on the road to open up the traffic lights so we can get by.
I was walking from a client and I saw every single intersection was out. I've been here for the last hour and a half.
It's quite the scene here. It's packed, it's crowded, but it's very orderly. And almost at every intersection there are citizens directing traffic. For the most part, this has been a citizen-inspired evacuation, if you will, that's been taking place.
The public has been outstanding. They're really helping, they're directing traffic, they're at intersections, and the people, the public, are pitching in. Stay home if possible. Don't drive unless it's absolutely necessary.
But you'll be very happy you watched this video and you listened to me and you went and bought yourself a few minimal things. You'll be a lot happier if you actually start to get into prepping, because then you feel you have some control over external events. But the truth is, we have no control over anything, and we need a lot of luck. Things like this are a way of increasing your luck. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great day. If you like this, please feel free to give me a thumbs up, a subscription. A subscription means you'll get more content like this. It also means you'll get some quite wacky content and not your normal channel. Keep an eye out for stuff like this. This is a bread product and it actually lasts for an awfully long time. Is it good nutrition? Probably not. Are you better off buying flour and storing that and making your own bread? Probably. This is a more convenient option. So from Wolfie and me, toodles. This has been a well-prepared Tiny Tot production 2023.
I guess I'm just staying calm because there's no use in fretting right now.
Here's the electricity.
We, along with tens of millions of people, will probably never forget what we were doing at 4:11 Eastern Time today.